Hey everyone, and welcome to our series on how to tell a story. Whether you're telling a joke, telling a fairy tale, or trying to persuade someone with a little empirical evidence, telling a story well is an important skill. While it comes naturally to some, for others, this skill is a learned one. Never fear. You can learn to tell a better, more engaging story with me as your guide. In part one of this three-part series, we'll start out where all good teachers do, in mastering storytelling fundamentals. Now let's get started. The first step to good storytelling is to engage your audience. Start your storytelling by interacting with your audience or doing something to grab their attention. Ask them a question, even if it's just rhetorical, that relates to the conclusion, twist, or context for the story you're going to tell. Alternatively, you can make a grabbing statement that catches their attention. It's like setting your hook, the equivalent of a clickbait headline. This forces their attention to focus on the idea of your story and makes them want to hear more. Fairy tales are rife with rhetorical questions that really get you centered in on the story. Think about the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. You might hear something like, "Have you ever wondered just how the seven dwarves got their names?" A lot of too good to be true or believe it or not examples start out with a little bit of hyperbole. For example, you might say, "I have the college roommate story to end college roommate stories." Let's just say it involves a toilet. The second thing you need to do is build the scene. Throughout your storytelling, you want to create an immersive experience. You want to tell your audience the story in a way that makes them feel like they're there. Start by giving them context when you begin your story. Continue to create the scene by using details which help them picture the action and feel the things that you felt. You're painting a picture for your audience. Don't be sloppy with your language. You want to use carefully tailored language. Use words which create a very strong, very specific emotion. Many fairy tales do this by using the starter, "Once upon a time," and build from there. So you might hear something like, "Once upon a time, when the world was old, and magic still lived, and beasts still spoke." The scene you set will really depend on the type of story you're telling. If you want to tell a funny story, you might start out with something like, "I'm sort of the quiet, owns multiple cats type, right? But my roommate was very much the 'what's a liver' type of partier." The third step to master is build tension and release tension. Of course, the entire arc of a story should be building tension until that climactic point in the story when the falling action of the conclusion. But what you need to remember is that a release of tension should come between the tension points. Payoffs in a story can't all come at once. Without this release of tension, a story can feel rushed or too list-like. Real life includes moments between the things that happen to us. Stories should too. This release of tension, this lull in the story, allows us time to regroup and reflect on the story. So this release can be a description of the scene and quick filling in of some semi-relevant details, or a joke if the story is meant to be a bit funny, something that just lowers the stakes of a story and allows us to catch our breath. In a fairy tale, these rises and falls in tension usually occur as our hero works towards the completion of his mission, right? Shrek doesn't save Fiona on the first day of the adventure. That wouldn't make for much of a movie now, would it? The same is true when you're telling a story. You're going to give them little jabs and chuckles that really set up for that knockout punchline. The fourth step you need to master is focus on what's important. When telling a story, it's important to include details to create that sense of immersion. However, you don't want the story to take on a rambling feeling. This is why it's very important to focus on what's important. Cut the details that aren't important for the story. Leave the ones that make the story. As time allows, keep the details that go the furthest to create proper pacing or set the scene, but adjust as necessary to meet the reactions of your audience. If they start to seem bored, speed it up and pare down to the necessities. Our fifth step to mastery is keep the flow logical. This is where knowing your story and practicing become important. You know that person that tells a story and they get partway in and then they're like, oh, I forgot to mention. Yeah, don't be that guy. Don't stop to back up. This breaks the listener's experience of the story. If you need to, readjust and tell the story in a way that is logical and flows smoothly. If you do forget a detail, weave it back in without breaking the experience of the story. For example, now, the Pied Piper wasn't just after the town's money for no reason. You see, they'd gone back on a deal they'd made with him. The final step to master is make it feel conclusive. It's awkward when an audience isn't sure if you're done or not, so make the conclusion of your story feel conclusive. There are a number of ways to do this, some examples of which are: ask a question and give an answer. How crazy is that? I know I'm sure not going to try that again. You could also state the moral. For example, this, ladies and gentlemen, is an excellent example of why you should never take your cat to work. And lastly, use tone and voice carefully. Try generally building in volume and speed until the climax of the story, at which point you should slow back down and lower your voice to show you are done. To recap, the 6 fundamentals of mastering storytelling are: 1. Engage your audience. 2. Build the scene. 3. Build tension and release tension. 4. Focus on what's important. 5. Keep the flow logical. And 6. Make it feel conclusive. Using these techniques, by the end of your story, your listeners will have something to remember, something to picture in their mind, and something they'll never forget. In part 2 of our Improving Your Storytelling series, we'll look at using your voice and body to make you a better storyteller.